Well, good morning, guys. Here we are, just 2 days after May Day. Wow, I don't know. Anybody get a May basket? You did. The neighbor. What a thoughtful neighbor. No, wow, that's neat. No May basket for me this year. So.
A little student come last night. He said, Mr. Goodman, in 2 days is going to be the National Star Wars Day. And he said, I said, what are you talking about? I said, May the 4th be with you.
May the 4th. Even I get that one.
That was pretty good.
That's pretty good.
Okay.
Well, we're continuing on. We're really going to be diving into the blessings, Jacob's blessings to his sons. And as I introduced the topic last week, there's some real questions. This is one of those times when I look at commentaries and read somewhat broadly on it, and it's conjecture. It's really a matter of interpretation. And what you'll hear from me is, again, a matter of interpretation. It's how I'm trying to be truthful, I'm trying to be honest, but it's really, which is, I think, part of interpretation. It's kind of how you want to see it. It's really hard to be unbiased. And what I'm talking about is what has been historically known as the blessings of Jacob to his 12 sons. At the most fundamental level, as we read what Jacob says to his 12 sons, some of which is not blessing. In fact, we would attach the word curse. And it's really, I'll just be very truthful, it's hard for me to accept the fact that Jacob was cursing in that term, cursing his sons on his hospice bed. So I'm working hard to overcome that, and what you're going to see here in the first blessing to Reuben, is the eldest son, is exactly what I'm talking about, and I'm sure this will go over 2 weeks as we look at it. So the way I've looked at this is we're going to look at the text. We're going to go from small to large. We're going to look at this blessing, or these words. I have a hard time attaching blessing to these words. We're going to look at these words, and then we're going to study primarily the content of what Jacob says to Reuben this morning, and then we're going to broaden out and look at the context, because really where I'm going with this is, what do these blessings have to do with us today? And it's a valid question, because they were placed in Scripture for a reason, and the text itself points to a much larger perspective. As we know, the nations of Israel, the 12 sons become the tribes of Israel, and the tribes of Israel have a history that goes out throughout Holy Scripture. So we got to believe there's a bigger picture here. And much of it is prophetic, and that's what excites me, is what is the meaning for us. And so that's where we're going to go with this, and we'll launch out on the first blessing, and then we'll adapt what we learned here to the remaining 11 blessings. So that's kind of where we're going on this. Genesis 49 verses 3 and 4. And would somebody read the text?
Reuben, thou art my firstborn, my might, and the beginning of my strength, the excellency of dignity, and the excellency of power. Unstable as water, you shall not excel, because you went up to your father's bed, then you defiled it, you went up to my couch.
What was the last phrase, Dave? How does yours read?
He went up to my couch.
He, switching to the third person. Okay. So what are some observations that you make here? Just just broadly speaking, what do you see at first reading?
Good start.
A good start, verse 1. It's, boy, can you imagine? Now, the context here is a hospice bed. Picture a hospice bed. Some of you, I know, have been around a hospice bed. And all of the sons are surrounding the bed. And dad is on the bed, and he's going through one by one. And that is the vision of where we're at here. It starts out great. As Bill said, Dave read from his text, excellency, is it? Excellency, indignity, preeminence is how it reads from the New American Standard, the text I'm using. Preeminent means ahead of the others or before the others. Number one, preeminent. Number one, in dignity and number one in power. Reuben, you are my firstborn, my might, and the beginning of my strength. Wow, it's a powerful word. And then what another comment. What else do you see here? What's that?
Preeminent.
Yeah, number one. And then, then we move into verse 4, uncontrolled is, you shall not be number one or not have preeminence. That would be putting too much in there. You will not be number one. I don't want to take that liberty there. And reason, why? Remember the story? We reference, I think it's 32, chapter 30, no, 35. It'll come up later in the slides. I can't remember where it is, but I have it written down. You went up to your father's bed. Remember the story?
Yeah.
What's that?
One of his concubines.
Bilhah, yeah. And Reuben went in and had a sexual relationship with Bilhah, which is one of Jacob's 2 concubines. And we, of course, as males, we think, oh, geez, this is a sexually driven, lustful kind of thing. Maybe. But really, what this was a power move to take preeminence over his dad's position as patriarch of the family. Because they're, at least according to what I have read, that sleeping with the concubine of the one in power is showing power over that one in preeminent power. So I think Jacob's words here are referencing, preeminence. You are preeminent, Reuben, my firstborn, my might, the beginning of my strength, meaning he is the firstborn. He is the strength of Jacob's, the fruit of Jacob's ability to procreate. You are firstborn, my son, preeminent in dignity. You're number one in dignity and preeminent in power, but, verse 4, uncontrolled as water, you shall not have preeminence. Okay? Because of this, what you did. Now the context of that out of the text, it's either in 32 or 35. 35, I think. One verse it said, Reuben went in and slept with Bilhah, and Jacob heard of it. The text ends right there. It leaves us hanging. It doesn't say anything else. So whatever we derive is an argument from silence. Then it goes into the naming of the 12 sons. Then you defiled it at that point. But then the dash, and then the switching to the third person. Any thoughts on that? These kinds of things just send interpreters off on all kinds of things.
God speaking, I guess.
What's that?
God speaking.
God speaking.
Storyteller speaking.
What's that?
Storyteller speaking.
Yeah, the writer. You know, this. You know, we got to believe this was written down. This was oral tradition written down at least 400 years after this occurred, because you know the attached author to this text would be Moses, and whatever your view of that is, you know, we're not going to discuss that, but.
Okay, the third person comes in with the word he, but then it occurs the first person with mine. And that he went up to my couch. Now it's back to Jacob talking at the end of the sentence.
He went up to my couch. Yes. Okay. Yes.
My thought is that the first few thoughts, he's talking directly to Reuben. But he's got 11 other sons there, and he might have said, he went up to my couch.
You
So the
know,
rest-
Jeff, that is exactly where I land.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, he just
And, you
took
know,
away from Reuben.
that is the most simplest interpretation. That when he's there with his sons, he's speaking directly to his sons, and then he pauses for a minute, just like Jeff has said, and he goes, he went up to my couch. And they would have known what that meant. That
Well,
this
and-
was a
and it might
no-no.
not- This might be the first time they're hearing it. You know,
It
was
may be.
such a short blurb in the first part, like you said, that it might have been only known by Jacob.
We know,
And then he was like letting that cat out of the
Letting the
bag.
cat out of the
Yeah.
Hey, I don't
Yeah.
know if you guys knew this, but
Yeah, that's a good point.
yeah, that's, Jeff, that's how I line up. But not everyone thinks that. I mean, this gets very complicated. Pages and pages have been written on this, but we're not going to go there because, yeah, go ahead.
NIV doesn't even change it.
No, NIV doesn't show us.
NIV just continues with the thought you went up to
With
my
the
bed,
second
up
person?
to the couch, right to my couch.
Yeah, and that's a whole nother subject. So, okay, but
It's a million.
this is closer to the original, and so I look at it this way. There's a reason here. There is a reason. We don't know the reason, but there's a reason, and that's what really excites me. Okay, so let's move on. So I'm going to take us down a journey here. First of all, we're at the micro level. We're looking at Reuben and Jacob's words to his son Reuben, and then time. You know, we'll kind of take this to where we end today, and then we'll pick up next week. But first of all, I want to start with who Reuben is. Who he is. What do we know about Reuben? Who is Reuben? Simple. Firstborn. And what we know about firstborn is that the firstborn has privileges up to twice as much, which is kind of interesting historically when you look at Ephraim and Manasseh. Anyway, and where Joseph's position is. But it was part of historic tradition in bona fide history that the firstborn had privileges. So who he is a boy and a man with privilege. Now, what's interesting about the biblical history and story is the firstborn in Scripture. If we look at all the firstborns, there were issues. Look at Cain and Abel. You know, look at Jacob and Esau. Isaac and Ishmael. You know, you look at history, and there's issues with this whole thing of firstborn, which we're going to reference here in a little bit. So, the background to Reuben's name, I'm looking at his name. His name is derived from when Leah gave birth to her firstborn son, and she said, "His name shall be Reuben. Behold, now my husband will love me." Remember, she was the second woman in Jacob's life. She lived under the cloud of not measuring up and not being loved as Rachel, her sister. That was apparent. And she was the first to give birth, and she said, now my husband will love me. And so she named him Reuben. Behold, a son. I've given you a son. Do you see that? So Reuben means, behold, a son. That's the literal interpretation of the word Reuven in Hebrew. Firstborn, behold a son, firstborn, moving across. And now the pronouncement coming down from Jacob at this time in life, you are mighty in strength, you are preeminent in dignity, and you are preeminent in power. Okay, what does this say about Reuben? Don't think too hard here.
One.
What's that?
You're number one.
You're not.
You had it all.
From all indication, son, you are number one. Okay? You are number one. Just as Jeff is saying. This is what it's saying. You are number one. You are number one. Everybody got that? Because that's important. So, then we go to how he saw himself. Who he is, but then we're now comparing how did Reuben see himself? Did he see himself as number one? No. He did not see himself as number one. And I've diagrammed this out. Notice here, first in position, I'm using, I'm shrinking that three-part definition down. The word dignity and the word power, I'm putting in two phrases. First in position of firstborn and first in power. He had position and he had power. He was number one. He was preeminent. However, he did not view himself as preeminent. He is viewing himself below the line right here, less than. He is less than. This is equal to or greater than. And here his eyes are looking through this lens of less than. He's looking through here up to first in position, first in power. In his mind, he has not yet attained what he already has. Think about that. In his mind, he has not attained yet what he already has, which is the firstborn privilege. And when one is working out of that context, before I move on, how common do you think this condition is?
Very.
Who said very? Tell us more, Dave.
Betty and I are just starting a study now based on a book by a guy by the name of Henry Wright, who, in very short terms, the basis of his ministry is that the illnesses and the struggles that we have, where there are certainly medical and physical and psychological conditions, the roots of what we suffer are spiritual in almost every instant.
That have a history.
Yeah, they have a history, and people who have the kind of problems that Reuben had, like going up to his father's bed, that kind of sexual immorality, is rooted in the need to be loved, and for whatever reason, through the lens that Reuben was looking, he didn't feel that he was loved, really loved, so he was seeking ways to find that in his own screwed up mind. So,
yeah.
But many of us, when we're lacking in something, or perceive that we're lacking in something, when the lens is fogged, we end up doing things that are not real healthy for us.
Right.
Try to compensate for those things.
Good. Thank you for that. And I would even go broader than that, and I would say this is what every human in this condition here, even though the outplay outflow of the action performed by Reuben doesn't correlate, but the condition, this condition, I believe, correlates to every human being. And this is my interpretive model that I'm working on. I believe, because of Genesis chapter 3, this is the condition of mankind right here, depicted by Reuben, that we have been given much. However, part of life's journey is that discovery of what we have already been given. Yes.
I don't know the right words for this, but in that light of that, I keep thinking of, the idea that with Christ given, all the stuff we've been given, you're right, and then we fight to keep it, or fight to achieve it. A little bit of difference, Tom, but nonetheless, we seem to have to want to take control of, we can't just accept it is, idea of doing versus being, accepting it. And then there's a certain behavior, when you accept who you are, you behave in a certain manner. So it's a difference between, let's use a president. Do you act presidential because you're president, or do you have to fight to prove you're presidential? The same thing with being a king or being the head of the household or a husband and stuff, You're there. Quit fighting for it, now just behave like you do. And then it's a slight difference in your approach.
Yeah. In my experience, my belief system is that it takes a long process in order to learn to and embrace what we already have. And the gospel of Christ ties right into this, but go ahead.
Well, the story of the prodigal son is a picture of this as well. When the second son, or the son that went away, comes back, and the older son goes, "Hey, what gives? You've never even, given me a goat for my friends or whatever." And the father says, "You have always had
Good.
everything you needed. You
Great
just
job.
didn't take advantage of what was yours."
It's slaving for you.
Interesting, yeah.
He didn't even realize the position he had or what was available to him, so he never took advantage of it. And then he griped about it when the father offered that to the son who had squandered.
Okay, great story and a great correlation. Now let's talk about the younger, is it the younger son that goes, no, is it the younger son?
Younger son, I believe.
Okay, the younger son goes away and he squanders his, he eats with the pigs and he bottoms out. And then he returns. What is it that caused the younger son to return back to the father?
Pig food.
Pig food, yeah.
But realizing
But on
that anybody that was with his father had access to good things.
He knew his dad at the core.
He what?
He knew who his dad
But what did he have to experience first?
it'd be
Pain.
pain.
And guys, I'm one that believes that our pain and our suffering is what leads us to this awakening and eye-opening experience. It's the pain that this young man experienced that brought him home. Dad had not changed, but he changed. And the son, who was at home in compliance, still, as you said, really, really well, Jeff, wasn't living in the full capacity of what he'd already been given. He demonstrated his lifestyle was different, but he hadn't experienced the pain, and therefore he couldn't accept either. They're both dealing with what I would call identity here. Where are we finding our identity? The older son, I'm a good man. The younger son, I'm wasted and I need help. And I need to go to my father. Okay, so he saw himself as less than, even though it is clear from birth, he had it. He was preeminent. He had the goods. He couldn't see it. He could not embrace it. So what he did was he grasped to obtain. He was trying to, here it is, grasp, and I'm looking at this from a larger perspective than just a sexual, lustful encounter. There is, in my opinion, more to this. It's a move in power. It's a move to grasp and to clinch a position of preeminence. And I just can't get through that. It's just so interesting. He's grasping for something he already has. Now, what does this tell? What could this tell us about some of the actions that we have observed, both from ourselves and in other people, about grasping for something else? David, your comment just a little bit ago about commenting on Reuben's actions, sleeping with Bilhah as a cry out for what? For love and acceptance. And he already had love and acceptance. Yeah.
This is the temptation of the wilderness. Jesus received the confirmation of love and acceptance, and the first thing that happened was everything was questioned. Are you going to grasp it, Jesus? Are you going to do this? Are you going to do that? Are you going to do this?
That's another great, yeah.
And Jesus said, no, I got it. I don't need to do this.
I've got it. I don't need to grasp it. Man, if you follow me, you'll get.
And that goes into Philippians 2nd chapter right out of the chute.
And so that's a reversal right there of the temptation in the wilderness. That's a reversal of what we see in Genesis chapter 3. Because there the temptation was there and it was grabbed. If you eat of the fruit, you will, this will happen.
Have what you already have.
Yeah. Yeah. So this idea of grasping for something we already have has really captured my attention. And I think it's at the core of what Jesus died for on the cross. The human condition that must be overcome only through Christ, in my opinion, only through Christ and embracing Christ. It ties in exactly with Jesus' words of dying to self. Except a grain of wheat fall into the ground. Yes?
I don't want people disparage the idea of living for pie in the sky, and that's a shame, because what we already have is an inheritance and a future and a resurrection ahead of us. And even if everything goes completely to hell here, that will never be taken away. And if we can embrace that in its reality, then nothing can threaten us. I mean, well, when are you going to get? Okay, God loves you. When are you going to get what He's supposed to give you? I said, I don't know here, but I know eventually it will come.
Yeah.
So I just don't have to. If everything goes to hell here, I hope not. It's going to be hard on me, and I'm human, so I'll probably flail all over the place. But at my core, it's going to be okay.
Well, and again, I just punctuate that with it takes a process to go through. I'm all for biblical teaching and to teach people at all ages of our inheritance and what we have in Christ. We need that, and that's wonderful. But I know I was taught that at a really young age. I was taught that in my 20s, and oh, that's cool, and that's cool. Wow, that's really cool. But it takes a while. It takes living life to go through this. And now at 63, I understand those texts at a whole different, I don't know if it's level, I can't say I'm that much deeper, but at a whole different capacity than I did in my 20s when I was taught that. Is that not true? Mm-hmm. We just see it differently. And why? Does it have to be that way? I don't know. But I know that suffering and pain is a major component. And only through, I think only through that do our eyes open where we can actually see it. Grasping to obtain something he already had. Wow. Jeez. But it's close to home. So what happened in the story is he was grasping to obtain, and once he reached out for it, he did the action with Bilhah, and it vaporized. And is that not the theme of many great movies, of the one grasping, many great stories? I think of, in our culture, we think of story as movies on the screen, but in the stories of the reaching out and the vanishing of what was being sought after. that brings great remorse. You know, oh man, we identify with that, we understand that, and it drives us to, God, what else is there? You know, the climbing of the corporate ladder. You know, you've heard this many times. You climb the corporate ladder, and when you get to the top, you realize you're leaning against the wrong building. I mean, we know it's story after story, and you've heard that before. And
That Ben Affleck movie you showed us.
yes, that really, right, and that's exactly right. And when that bottoming out occurs, there's the opportunity for a new birth. Bobby, we saw the new birth in
That's when
Bobby.
we find out we're shitty carpenters.
This is totally an aside, but I ever thought that if this would never happen with how I fly, but if Kevin Costner ever sat down beside me on an airplane, one of my first things, I love that line. I don't. That's totally an aside, but so this is a great place to end this, and we've looked at the story. We've looked at what he had. We looked at how he saw himself, and because he saw himself a certain way, he acted in a certain way, grasping for what he already had. And then as he did that, it vanished. That's verses 3 and 4. Now, we're going to switch now next week to Jacob's words. We're going to look at it now from Jacob's. Was he cursing his son? Or, you know where I'm going with it, or stating facts? And we're going to grapple. I'm going to lay this out next week in a little more detail as we look at Jacob's word. And this is going to give us a model, a framework to understand the other negative things that are said during this series of blessings, or whatever you want to call them, statements, testaments, Jacob's testament here. And so we'll look at that, Jacob's words, curse or fact. That's where we'll pick up next week. So,
Guys, thank you for filling this whole thing out. It makes it easier for me. Don't forget the Blessed Restaurant.